I never believed in ghosts or spirits, but something was different about this feeling. It was as though someone was watching my every move. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but it only continued to intensify. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison yard. This all began when I moved for a fresh start to a new town with new opportunities, but I wasn't used to being alone in a different environment altogether. One night, when I was all alone in my apartment, I had a nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. My skin prickled. I heard faint shuffling inside the room and a cold draft in the hall. For reasons beyond my understanding, the lights flickered on and off a few times before plunging me into darkness. It must have been an isolated event, I guessed, and maybe I willed the voices and vague shatters within me. Meanwhile, around midnight, the sounds got louder, and my heart then pounded in my chest as still, as if waiting to be consumed by fear of increasingly worse thoughts. Footsteps sounded like they were drawing close to my door. Since the courage inside me had begun slowly consuming, I whispered a timid greeting in response to the shuffling in the front room. "Hello?" Receiving a reply would have spoken volumes, letting me know it wasn't my imagination at work. Instead, panic and goosebumps overtook me as I heard the sound of someone breathing heavily outside my front door, with their warm breath pushing through the gaps in the doorframe. Heavy footsteps paced up and down the hallway, loudly. Suddenly, I heard the steady sound of fingernails on the screen door, the nails scraping fiercely against metal. My heart thumped inside my chest, beating to the tempo of my doom as I huddled on the couch tightly, fearing that the perpetrator may enter the room I found security in. I wondered how many other people, too, had felt this feeling, to protect themselves and their world, confused and never sure if this was really happening. From the edges of the terrace, I watched a shrouded male figure crushing up to my screen door. His silhouette threw shadows, illuminating him. I could feel my heart drop as the shrouded man's outline became clear. His icy gaze seemed to bore into my soul, only adding to the fear escalating inside me. In that moment, I realized I had to act fast if I wanted to make it out of this alive. Pushing aside my fear, I got up from the couch and made my way to the door. Gripping the doorknob tightly with one hand, I braced myself for what was about to happen. With a deep breath, I flung the door open. To my surprise, I saw it wasn't a shrouded man at all, but a hooded figure that looked no more than 16 years old. Despite this, I felt relieved when I saw his harmless expression. As he walked towards me with a shy smile, I realized it was his way of asking for help. It wasn't easy for me, but I chose to help him safely return home that night. It wasn't until the next day, after speaking with the neighbors, that I learned about some of the faces hidden behind the veiled entrances walking amongst us with dubious intentions. I concluded that sometimes our own apprehensions and paranoia can make us perceive even the slightest of things as sinister. In the end, however, it was my instincts that compelled me to open the door. As I sat alone on my couch in silence, the screen door forcefully squeezed to bang one last time, forewarning me of what not was to be forgotten anytime soon. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling of being watched that long. I moved to protect and reassure myself from harm, without overlooking my own vulnerabilities. However, it wasn't until that night, when my fears became real, that I truly understood the consequences of letting our apprehension govern us without having a full understanding of the situation. I learned that the need to live in the moment often overshadow the apprehensions within us. We can make adversity seem incontrovertible, yet be guided through those minds made hideouts by trusting grit and intuition. For now, I had lived this fear. I was determined from this point forth that it would no longer rule my life. I always thought living alone would be liberating. No more roommates to complain about my messy habits or blasting music at odd hours. I'd have complete control over my space and my time. It would be bliss. Or so I thought. It started with small things that I brushed off as coincidence or paranoia. The curtains would be pulled back, just slightly, when I was sure I had closed them earlier. A cup would be in a different place than where I remembered leaving it. Nothing major, but just enough to make me question myself. But then I started hearing noises late at night, scratching at the windows, the sound of footsteps muffled by the carpet. Once, I even woke up to find a door in my apartment slightly open, which was strange because I never left my doors unlocked. At first, I tried to convince myself that my imagination was just playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was like a persistent itch in the back of my brain that I just couldn't shake. I started to feel uneasy in my own home, always checking my windows and doors multiple times and staying up later and later just to make sure I was safe. Then, I began receiving anonymous calls when I was home alone. The voice on the other end was always breathy and mysterious, offering vague compliments and warnings that didn't make sense. I tried to hang up as soon as I heard the voice, but it was always too late. They already knew too much about me. Soon enough, things escalated. I would have the distinct feeling that someone was standing right behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. Or things would disappear and then reappear somewhere else. I lived my life always looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was constantly being toyed with. I decided maybe I was being paranoid and that I could stick it out. But that's when things took a much darker turn. The anonymous calls turned into a visitor at my doorstep, sometimes at odd hours. I never saw the person, just footsteps and intense breathing. I never knew who was stalking me, what their motives were, or when they would strike next. Once that realization hit me, I knew I had to take action. I couldn't live in a constant state of fear and uncertainty anymore. So I installed a security system in my apartment and made sure all my doors and windows were locked and secure. Finally, the anonymous calls and the visitor stopped, and I started to feel like maybe things could go back to normal. That was until I received a package in the mail containing a note from my stalker mentioning things that only they could know about me. I felt sick to my stomach, wondering how on earth this person could have possibly known those things. The note included an invitation to a public meeting spot with a demand to come alone and unarmed if I ever wanted to feel safe again. I knew I had to go, even if it meant jeopardizing my life. I drove to the location and waited nervously, wondering who it could possibly be. My palms were sweaty and my heart was pounding. Just as I was about to turn and walk away, a hooded figure approached me, and for a moment I almost lost my mind. But that's when I heard the voice. It was the person I had loved for years, who I thought had died just weeks before in a car accident. They had been staying anonymous for a reason, seeing if I could manage without them in my life. I felt both relieved and angry at the same time, but mostly relieved. The relief washed over me as I realized that I wasn't alone in the world, that someone out there cared about my safety and was willing to implore a ruse to protect me. That feeling never left me, knowing that someone I cared about was always there for me, even when they may have made a mistake. As unorthodox as their methods were, they got the job done in the end. It was a typical Saturday night, and I had just settled into my cozy apartment, ready to binge watch my favorite show on Netflix. My roommate had gone out for the weekend, leaving me alone, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed the solitude. The apartment was located in a peaceful neighborhood, and I had never felt unsafe before. As the night dragged on and the show played on my laptop, I noticed a strange noise outside. At first, I attributed it to lousy insulation or maybe the wind, but it persisted. Curiosity eventually got the best of me, and I tiptoed to the window, gently pulling the curtains aside to peek outside. I wasn't expecting to see anything, but there it was, the bright glow of a flashlight shining into my window, hovering like a menacing eye. The heart raced in my chest, and my hands started to shake uncontrollably. For a moment, my brain couldn't wrap around what was happening. I didn't have any enemies or people angry with me or my roommate. Why would someone be peeping inside our apartment at 11 p.m.? Quickly, my instincts kicked. I quickly moved away from the window to prevent the person from discovering I noticed them. Taking deep breaths, I tried to halt my panicky thoughts as adrenaline coursed through my veins. Who could be doing this? Was it someone I knew? As I tried to recall if I had gotten any threat or passed through someone who I hadn't been quite friendly with, the torch outside grew stranger. The person didn't move, but the sound of footsteps, pacing slowly, echoed outside of my window. Now that someone was stalking me freaked me out even more. I pulled myself together, grasping for my phone to dial 911. As I fumbled for my phone, my mind went on overdrive with worst-case scenarios. What would happen if the stalker finds a way into the apartment? Should I open my door and bolt to the next-door neighbor's house, exposing myself to more danger? My painful thoughts were interrupted when the person outside spotted my movements, and the light was immediately turned off. Fear clenched my muscles and made it impossible to speak. I stood frozen for a moment, hoping that whoever was outside had left. But then, I heard a slow tapping sound, like someone was testing the locks of my apartment's front door. My body began to shake with fear, and my mind raced with different options that would keep me relatively safe. Without much of a second thought any longer, I gathered all the courage left in me, wrapped a blanket closely around my body, grabbed my phone, and sneaked out the balcony into the chilly night. From my vantage point, I could see the shadow of a person lingering outside the front door, slowly removing something from their pocket and flexing what looked like a metallic object in their hand. I knew that my only route of escape was to climb down the fire escape, and that was what I did at lightning speed. My heart racing, I stumbled and fell but kept pushing, barely feeling the freezing cold concrete floors as I made my way down. Just as I finally got closer to the ground floor, I noticed the dimly lit backstreet alley filled with crates, trash cans, and odd scarps that can hide any danger waiting for me. Finally, when my feet hit the unremarkable path, I sprinted with pumps to the patrol police station nearby, explaining every bit of experience out of breath to the policeman, who kindly reassured me and dispatched some officers back to my haunted apartment. After what looked like forever, the policeman came out with news that the crazed individual had fled. They didn't quite believe that my home was targeted, as another apartment down the floor had been robbed the evening before. I tried to press for the matter anyway, but it occurred to me that as scared as I was, I would never know whether it was a mistake that my grounds were picked, or it was an intentional act. For days, I slept remaining vigilant, setting a bigger bolt to prevent any unauthorized access. But the thought of an unknown, terrifying stalker out there was still holding true in my mind. Every creaking floorboard and outside noises made me jump, always leaving my overworried mind in an anxious state.